Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a Paragon Guide. I am Sylphin. This is another video that so many of you have been waiting for, damage versus basic penetration. We are only covering basic penetration simply because basic and ability are, while they're pretty much the same, the scenario involving them are just so different. So we had to split them up, talk about them differently, and this video is about basic penetration. So ladies and gentlemen, here it is. It's not that bad, but there's a few things that I need you to do before we get into this. I need you to set aside your assumptions, your kind of underlying understandings of what damage and penetration are. You need to do that in order to open up your mind and be receptive to new ideas and new ways of looking at things that may be a little bit more relevant as to actually what, is actually better for you. So please keep that in mind. Keep an open mind while we go into this, because for very good reason that we will get into very shortly. So ladies and gentlemen, damage versus basic penetration. There's a few statements we need to make right off the bat. Statement number one, all heroes have base armor of both kinds as they level up and as they start. So every hero has 30.5 ability armor, which we're not really talking about that much, but every hero has either 22 for supports and I believe casters, and also 48 basic armor for rangers. They're at level 15. Those are kind of the level 15 numbers. So keep that in mind. Every hero has base armor. Every hero has base armor. Keep that in mind. Now, the reason why I said keep an open mind is statement number two. While penetration and damage are two different stats, they're two different things, they are both the same in terms of what they do. They both increase your damage. Both of them, which are different, actually end up doing the same thing. Both increase your damage, just in different situations. We can treat damage and penetration as the same thing, except they just work a little differently, and that's what we're going to talk about. Please accept that, because it is true. Damage and pen are basically the same thing, they just work in different scenarios. Keep that in mind. So guys, because we're talking about damage and penetration and stuff, we have each hero and their current stats, so their basic cooldown damage, basic attack damage per level that they gain, attack speed, etc., etc. And this chart is a little more complicated than the other ones, because we are talking about three different stats here. We have to do this a little differently. If I had a three-dimensional chart here that kind of displayed all numbers and all possibilities, that would be wonderful, but I don't. So we have to do this one a little differently. So because, guys, we are talking about penetration, we have to include armor. So this right here, ladies and gentlemen, this right here is the armor of the target that we are attacking. This is the damage that we are building in our build, and this is the basic penetration that we build in our build. So if we take Greystone here, for example, we're going to switch this to level 15, and against the armor of, say, a caster or a support here at 22 basic armor. Now here is all of the DPS that is calculated versus on Greystone's stats here on certain amounts of damage and certain amounts of penetration. So this is the DPS, damage per second, that is calculated when you take in the armor of the enemy hero, all of his base stats, the fact that he's a level 15, the built-in damage that we have here for a build, and the basic pen. Now if we start here in this top left corner here, we can see he gets 64 damage. Now if we keep going down, we see that we actually increase damage. The most damage is actually found in the most building more damage instead of penetration, and that continues for quite a while. Now we can see here that a little bit of pen actually produces the same amount of DPS, a little bit more, and then it starts to kind of go back into damage favor, but here it seems to be a little bit of a point. Now here we can keep on going, etc., etc. We can see that certain things here kind of start to emerge. We can see that after 12 points of damage, a little bit of penetration is actually better. Now, if we continue this for each character, we can see that in a final Greystone build, we say let's say we have 17 total damage and penetration. So let's go 16 and 1. What gives us the most DPS? Well, against a target with 22 armor, and we have 17 total points of damage, which is up here in this graph over here. We're having total CP of value, not the cost. So this is including upgraded bonuses and stuff like that, even actives if you really want to do some special math. 17 total damage and penetration. So 16 and 1 here. Then we can see if we go up here, the damage actually increases with the penetration. So we can see that against a target of 22 armor and we have 20 penetration, that is actually the most DPS. So we can see that we actually need some penetration against a target that has 22 armor. Now, what if we increase this armor? Say we go up against a target with like a ranger. A ranger has basic armor of 48. What happens now? Well, if we continue that process, start over here with 16 and 1, something changes here. We can see that damage actually increases with the more damage that we build instead of penetration. Now, I do want to point out that look at the DPS difference between going all pen and going, or as much pen as possible here, 6 points of damage here and 12 points of penetration. Check out the DPS difference. 2 DPS. It's basically negligible. But what this actually says here, the fact that more damage is actually more and gives us more DPS, is that there's a point of diminishing returns that we have met. There's a point of diminishing returns just with how penetration works in the math and armor, as it kind of reduces the percentage damage mitigation, and because that's a percent and damage is kind of only works off your scaling and it's kind of like a fixed number kind of, there's a point where building penetration actually hurts you, where you could have actually just put that in damage and gotten more. So we have somewhere in between 20 penetration and 48 penetration is a point where penetration actually starts hurting Greystone. And you know what? We can actually find that out relatively easy. Now, if I was to tweak this armor value going up by 1, 41, 42, 39, 38, you would notice that right at about 40, against a target with about 40 damage, you will notice that the DPS stays the same or goes up just a tiny bit. If I was to go to 41, then this would trend in the opposite direction, meaning that somewhere between 40, 41, 42 armor, that means that penetrating that much armor is actually the point of diminishing returns. For Greystone, with his scaling, with his stats, there is a point of no return for penetration where building damage is actually better. Basically, each hero has a maximum amount of penetration where it starts to, because of their scaling and because of their stats here, starts to hurt them. And for Greystone, that is about 40 penetration. Now, we go over here to this huge blob up here, we can see that for the total amount of CP worth of value of damage and penetration based on my previous damage versus attack speed versus crit build guide video, go check that out if you haven't seen it. This is how much damage and penetration total CP worth of value, including upgraded bonuses and everything like that, that we're playing with. There is actually a point of no return for each hero, and that is now what we are going to reveal and talk about some conclusions that we will go back to the math here, but you will see very shortly that there's some very interesting conclusions we can draw. And here we go. So for all of these fighters and rangers, there is a point of diminishing returns for each hero based on their scaling and just how their base stats kind of interplay with pen, and pen being a weird sort of reducing a percentage that's on its own kind of, you know, logarithmic scale. It's kind of weird. There's a point of no return. So basically what this means, guys, is that somebody like Sparrow building more than 5 penetration is actually not good. Building more penetration than 5 CP's worth of penetration actually hurts you. Even if a target has more armor than this amount of penetration warrants, building damage still is better than pen. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Even if a target has more than 5 CP worth of penetration is 20. If somebody has more than 20 armor and you're going up against them as a Sparrow, building only 20 penetration and then more damage actually gives you more DPS. Because of the way that their scaling works and stuff like that, you see Sparrow here gets all the damage you put on Sparrow, she gets all of it. Where somebody like Rampage, he only gets 60% of the damage that you actually build on him. Because of that, there's some interesting play along with their other stats here that works really interestingly. Anyways, these are the maximum amount of CP's worth of value of penetration you can build. Kwang, for whatever reason, is a beast. If somebody chooses to have a crap ton of armor, Kwang can actually really use that penetration to completely negate that. But somebody like Sparrow, she really likes her damage, so she can't really build that much pen. That's what this means. Now, some conclusions that we can draw here about this math. Conclusion 1. The first 8 or so for Klari and Kwang to 12 CP for about Sparrow, build that into damage first. So the first 8 to 12 CP, depending on your hero, is best put into damage instead of penetration. So if we go over here for Greystone, you kind of saw that right off the bat. Even against somebody with 40 armor here. For Greystone, you can see that building damage is actually better than building penetration. It's trending to damage. Damage for the first significant amount of bonus power is actually better than going pen. So in the early game, definitely, since people won't have that much basic armor to begin with, it's best to go for damage right off the bat. That is definitely the best. That is what the math says. The first 8 to 12 total CP of value of damage should go into damage first and not penetration. Now this next conclusion takes into account a statement we made earlier. Because everybody has base armor, build a minimum of 5 CP of penetration in order to pierce base armor. Then max out your penetration according to your target priority's total basic armor. What does that mean? Well, all heroes have at least 5 CP's worth of penetration to build. Everybody has at least 22 basic armor, all heroes, whereas Rangers, they have 48. So, building at least 20 pen or 5 CP's worth of penetration is completely sound. That's perfect. That's wonderful. That means that you're actually, because penetration is better than damage, once you have like 30 or 17 damage and stuff, because penetration is actually better there in the end game, it is totally worth going at least 5 CP into penetration. Then max out your penetration according to your target priorities total basic armor. Now, if I am a Kalari, for example, going up against a Ranger and if I'm just a Kalari period, my target priority is the Ranger. Absolutely. At least, probably half the time, if not more, I want to be targeting that Ranger. So since the Ranger has 48 base armor, I need to consider the possibility of building more than 5 CP of penetration in order to maximize my DPS on that target. I need to think of building a little bit more than 5 CP's worth of penetration in order to maximize my damage on that Ranger, because penetration is better than armor, or penetration is better than damage there in the late game. Once you have that foundation of damage, you need to consider that. You know, half the time I'm going to be attacking the Ranger, and then the other, you know, the supports and the casters, which, you know, the supports will definitely have, you know, probably some armor that you can definitely, you know, pierce through. So as a Kallari, I would be thinking maybe somewhere around here for the penetration, maybe even going all out so that I can absolutely delete that Ranger from the battlefield, because they're definitely not going to be building armor. So maybe somewhere around here for the penetration, just to ensure that I have maximum damage on that Ranger, and the supports there that you can totally delete. Now, we have made a couple statements here that pen is better than power, and I need to clarify that. Conclusion number 3. Penetration is better than power. It gives you more DPS. If, 1, it is actually penetrating armor, right? You can't reduce people to negative armor, so penetration is better than power only if it is actually penetrating armor. And 2, it is not over the above maximums or the diminishing return points. So if I am a Sparrow, like we said earlier, and I'm building 7 max, if I'm building 7 CP's worth of penetration, no, that two extra CP that I built into pen should actually go into damage in order to mathematically increase my DPS more. So, somebody like Kallari, like we said, if your penetration is actually going to be piercing armor, build as much of it, because that gives us the most DPS. Now, there's actually a third situation that actually needs to be, you know, included, and that is that base armor. You need that, or that base power, sorry. That base power you need there in order for penetration to kind of amplify. Does that make sense? You need that base damage in order for that, that penetration to really work. Now, if you really did want to build 13 pen on a Kallari, and you're only utilizing 19 total CP worth between damage and pen, well, that would mean that you have 6 power for damage. That is actually still mathematically sound. You can see here that Kallari can build 13 CP's worth of penetration and basically still have maximum DPS. On a target that has 52 armor, she can really use that penetration, because look, the DPS difference is 1. Yes, it is 1, so that diminishing return point is a touch below 52 armor, but since you can only build pen in 4 increments, it's a little hard to kind of, you know, split that hair. So I would say no more than 52, because she can actually use it. Other heroes can't, but she actually can. Now, the next conclusion here is something that's quite interesting here. We need to consider that if team fights are what decide most games, which I would posit would be acceptable, a acceptable conclusion. Team fights are what mostly decide games nowadays. Then we must mostly ignore the fact that minions don't have armor. Some of you are going to say, well, what about maximizing my damage on minions, on towers, etc., etc.? If I'm positing that building as much pen as necessary, what about those minions? Well, simply put, minions don't really matter if team fights are what decides the outcomes of most games. If that is true, then we don't really We shouldn't, therefore, really care about our damage on minions. Now, you're going to say towers. Well, towers have armor. Towers have armor. They definitely do. So you can use that penetration. Somebody like Orb Prime, well, you're probably going to want to group to everybody, and everybody's DPS on Orb Prime is more than enough to take that out in a quick fashion, and building and, you know, trying to build more power just for Orb Prime, that is not a smart idea. So I think that logically, I can conclude that if we accept team fights to be what decides most games, which I would definitely say is a reasonable assumption, then we must mostly ignore the fact that minions don't have armor. You would preferably want to slow push lanes anyways, and then even if you are, you know, fast pushing a lane to kill a tower, the fact that you didn't put a few CP into power and instead of penetration, it's not going to make that big of a difference. That argument is pretty much invalid if you ask me. The next conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, is that heroes that deal high ability damage, however, will need to consider ability pen if wanting to focus on ability damage. If we are positing here that penetration is better than damage, well, maybe you should consider some ability pen then as well if you want to focus on ability damage. We haven't talked about ability pen, and that is in the next video, but somebody like Crunch, somebody like Kalari, maybe like Chimera. It's really tough to say. If you are considering that, I would say maybe consider ability pan, maybe consider just putting a little bit more into damage, but that is something that I am definitely aware of, and definitely something that you need to take into consideration. There you guys go, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully this makes sense. Please go back and watch this, as me rambling on really wouldn't be that good. Now, just to recap, penetration is basically better than power if it is penetrating armor and you don't go over the maximums here for these heroes and go over that point of diminishing returns. You can build this much CP's worth of penetration on these heroes as long as you are actually penetrating armor. Don't worry about taking away from power simply because we have assumed here, we have deduced that basically minions and anybody that doesn't, anything on Agora that doesn't have armor really isn't that important. There you guys go, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you found this useful. Please go back, like I said, rewatch this, try to understand. It's a little bit harder to explain, and I hope that I did that well enough for you. Please, ladies and gentlemen, like this video if you like it, dislike it if you dislike it, share it with the community. Please share it with the community, because so many people think that penetration is useless, and it is absolutely not. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Please share it with the community. Do whatever you can, please, because I just want to help the community. I really do. I just want to spread this knowledge, spread this, and spread what this has to say, what the math says with the community. Please subscribe if you want to continue to see content like this, because oh boy, you know, ability pen is next. Health versus armor is coming out, and health versus armor versus lifesteal is coming out, which, oh boy, there's some interesting things in there for sure. Till next time, ladies and gentlemen, like always, stay optimistic and positive.